Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's District Administration Web Seminar here today, which is entitled Putting the Science of Reading into Practice, which is brought to you by the generous support of our sponsor here today, iStation. Now, before we get started, I would just like to share just a few housekeeping items with you. If at any time you need any technical support here today, please use the chat panel, which you can find on the right side of your screen. Then just select on my name, which is Stephen Blackburn, and then type in your message and I'll get back to you as quickly as I can. I'm also about to submit a phone number and access code in the chat that you can dial into if you want to listen in privately or if you don't have any speakers. So look out for that in the next few moments. We will also be welcoming any questions that you have here today. So there will be a Q&A session that will be happening at the end of the presentation. You can submit all of your questions by using the Q&A panel, which you can find at the bottom right side of your screen, and then send your questions to all panelists and we will answer them for you. If you currently don't see the chat or the Q&A panels, again, look to the lower right-hand side of your screen, then click on the expand triangle, which is directly in front of the panel name, to make sure you have access to it. Also, the last point I'd like to make is that if you would like to access the web seminar at a later time, you will be pleased to know that everyone who is registered and who is attending here today, all of you will receive an email with a link from us from DA to the slides and an archive recording. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our speakers here today. We have Sabrina Jones, who is the Director of Professional Services at iStation, and with her is Sonia Solak. Sonia is the Strategic Partnerships Consultant also at iStation. Hello, and great to have you with us here today. We're really excited.
Thank you so much, Stephen. We are excited to be here, and I want to thank everyone for your time and joining us today. And to honor that time, we will get straight to it. So our agenda for today is to go in and talk a little bit about what that research says about how students learn to read. So we're going to take a look at the science of reading and a little bit of a look at structured literacy. And then we're going to talk about how a data-driven approach can really optimize instructional time, and then those time-saving assessment tools that you can use to help accelerate that critical reading development. So before we dive in, let's go ahead and do a poll, and if you could please answer for us, how familiar are you with the science of reading? Very familiar, somewhat familiar, or not familiar? Like we've got some results coming in.
Yep, a few more coming in. We almost had 100% participation.
Good job.
All right. Well, if you're looking at the poll results, you can see we have a very diverse audience today. We have about 36% of you are very familiar, 60% somewhat familiar, and C, not familiar. So you're in the right spot where you can learn a little bit more. Maybe it's a refresher, maybe it's a reminder, or maybe it's totally new. So just stay tuned and hang on, and we will get you right to it. Thanks, Sonia.
Sure, thank you. So let's talk a little bit about what we know about reading across the nation right now. So, even before the pandemic came along, nearly 2/3 of students were not able to read at grade level. And those scores really had been getting worse for several years. And then along came COVID, right? And pandemic school closures and remote instruction made learning to read much harder, especially for young and low income students who didn't have adequate technology at home or, didn't have an adult who could assist them during the day. So what did that pandemic do is it made a bad situation worse. So if we think about what we know about learning to read, we know that research tells us that spoken language or that oral language is hardwired inside the human brain. So it's a natural process and the human brain is fully adapted for language processing. So any child, unless neurologically impaired or hearing impaired, will learn to talk. I mean, by the time a child is 10 months of age, he or she already has learned how to recognize the speech sounds or those phonemes of language spoken by caregivers. But reading, on the other hand, must be systematically taught. It's not hardwired in us to learn to read. So we then need to think about, well, what do we know about how students learn to read and what is that science of reading? So the science of reading is a comprehensive body of research. It has been conducted over the last 5 decades across the world. It's derived from thousands of studies conducted in multiple languages. And a few of the different disciplinary fields that are involved in this research include education. So think all things pedagogy and instructional methods and materials. And then we have developmental and cognitive psychology, which is that study of language structure. And that helps us to understand what we need to teach and how we need to sequence instruction. So what prerequisite knowledge and skills are necessary for new knowledge and skills to build on. There's linguistics. Oh, I'm sorry, I said that backwards. Linguistics was the one I just described. Let me go back and describe developmental and cognitive psychology. I skipped over one. So that developmental and cognitive psychology is important because when we have an understanding of how people learn, that then helps us to understand more about how we teach. And then importantly too is that neuroscience piece, and that's the study of the structure and function of the brain. So that neuroscience helps us to understand what parts of the brain are involved in different reading activities and how do the brains of normal readers look different from brains of struggling readers, and even how things change as students receive the proper interventions. So the findings from all of these different fields really help us to understand how students learn to read, what they need to learn, and what happens when we teach them in different ways. And it really helps answer those key questions then of what should we be teaching, when should we be teaching it, and how should it be taught. So following a comprehensive review of the research on the science of reading, that 2000 National Reading Panel report stated that students need to have explicit instruction in the essential components of reading to become good readers. So they need that phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and reading comprehension. But there are also two great visuals that are widely used to help explain the science of reading to classroom teachers and all of those involved in reading education to help guide instructional practices. And those are the simple view of reading and Scarborough's rope. So let's take a look first at that simple view of reading. So in the 80s, psychologists Goff and Tumner developed a scientific theory of reading comprehension that they called the simple view of reading. And what this theory tells us is that reading comprehension is the product of decoding and language comprehension. So in order to be strong at reading comprehension, you have to be strong at decoding, and you have to have background knowledge and understand what you are reading. So if anything on the left-hand side of this equation is missing, then reading comprehension is going to be downgraded because inefficiency in one component may lead to overall reading failure. Now, our other model is Scarborough's rope. So Hollis Scarborough expanded on that idea of the simple view of reading in 2001 with this reading rope. And what she essentially did was she created a metaphor using a rope. And this can be used to help us visualize the different components that are necessary to produce skilled readers. So there are those two main sections, just like in the simple view of reading, the language comprehension and word recognition. But then what she did was she broke down and listed the sub-skills under those components. And so those different sub-skills within language comprehension and word recognition can be thought of as strands. And when woven together, it's these strands that become the rope that represent that skilled reading. So it's important to remember that all of those strands of Scarborough's rope are interdependent and they do develop in students over time. So the idea then is that as student knowledge develops and increases with those individual language comprehension skills, a student's reading is going to become increasingly strategic. And as that student knowledge develops and increases with the word recognition skills, those skills are going to become increasingly automatic. And it's the combination then of these two areas that gives us skilled reading.
Great job, Sonia. You provided a very nice summary of a quick overview of a big body of research, including the science of reading, Scarborough's rope, the simple view of reading. And while Sonia was giving you that information, I put into the chat channel, if you haven't had a chance to take a look at that, some of the research that she was using as we developed this content. So if you want to do further reading, there's a lot of information in the chat about the simple view of reading, that 2000 National Reading Panel research. You can download the entire document there. So for your own information to go back and do a little more reading on the topic. But before we go on, I want you to take a little moment to think about what you've picked up during this time together. Was it something you reminded you of? Is it new learning or made you think of something differently? So if you would take a minute to think about that and just pop it right into the chat. Great. Thank you so much for putting that information into our chat. We appreciate your feedback and your interactivity. So we will pass it back over to Sonia.
Thank you so much, Sabrina, and thank you so much for your participation. So let's see here. Knowing that the science of reading is the research and evidence behind how students learn to read, we can then turn to the application or the how behind teaching reading in the classroom. So we're taking it from that research to that instruction and putting it into practice in our schools and across our districts. So structured literacy is an instructional approach that applies the science of reading to classroom practice. And it includes 6 evidence-based elements that are directly related to language and literacy development. And it includes pedagogical principles of instruction, or the how behind teaching. So the big picture then is that effective reading instruction for most children is going to incorporate those elements or the what we need to teach with those guiding principles or the how of the teaching elements. So what I'd like to do here is I'd like to break down those 3 guiding principles a bit further to be sure that we really understand what systematic and cumulative and explicit and diagnostic mean with regards to structured literacy. So when we say that teaching is systematic, this means that the organization of material follows the logical order of language. So the sequence is going to begin with the easiest and most basic concept and elements, and it's going to progress to more difficult. Cumulative means that each step is based on concepts previously learned. So this kind of reminds me all of that house analogy, right? We can't go ahead and start putting up the roof and building the walls unless we have a good solid foundation put in first. So I feel like this really helps us to see how we need to start with that foundation and then continue to build up the house from there. When we hear that word explicit in education, right, that refers to instruction, and that instruction that requires the deliberate teaching of concepts with continuous teacher-student interaction. So yeah, we can't assume that students will naturally deduce any concepts on their own. And then when we hear diagnostic, right, this refers to the teacher's ability at being adept at individualizing instruction and differentiating instruction to meet a student's need. The explicit instruction should be based on careful and continuous assessment, so both formal and informal, and that content presented must be mastered to a degree of automaticity. So think about how we just talked about that decoding component from Scarborough's rope, right? And how automaticity is critical to freeing the student's attention and cognitive resources for that comprehension and expression to be able to take place. So if we think then about the big picture and we think about the science of reading and that research that has been conducted around how students learn to read and how and what we need to teach that structured literacy approach to achieve reading success with all learners, I'd love to take some time for us to really think about and consider and reflect on what is happening within and across the grade levels at your campus or within your district. And I think that some key considerations to keep in mind and think about with regards to putting the science of reading into action include curriculums. So thinking about how well do your curriculums and programs support the science of reading? And is the teaching that's occurring in the classroom systematic and cumulative and explicit? And have those teachers, really importantly, had the necessary training and support to teach the curriculums well and the time to learn how to communicate the material from those curriculums effectively to students? I think you need to also think about scheduling. And is there time built into schedules to allow for that direct teaching of concepts and time to work with whole group as well as small groups to individualize instruction? And then, of course, professional development. Have teachers had the appropriate trainings and professional development with regards to the science of reading and structured literacy's evidence-based teaching principles? But I think very importantly, we need to consider those assessments and the data that we're collecting from them. So are there those formal and informal assessments in place that are being used with fidelity within and across grade levels to provide the necessary data that aligns to the science of reading to help inform teachers so they can form and ultimately transform their instruction in the moment to meet the needs of their students and help accelerate that reading development.
Great, Sonia. You did a great job of making the connections actually between the research of science of reading and connecting that to structured literacy. And before we go a little further, we know one of the key components for any type of formative instruction, formative assessment is to take a look at data. So use your little chat feature again and put in the chat, what are you currently using to assess your students' literacy skills now? And don't be shy. Feel free to type it in there and so we can move forward and make even more connections.
And if you do want them to come in anonymously, you can submit them in the Q&A panel, but please feel free to put them in the chat so everyone can see.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Stephen. I think that while y'all are typing that in, I think it's really important that we remember that sometimes we need to really give those curriculums a chance. I know that when I was a teacher, it was really common that curriculums would just come and go before we really had a chance as teachers to use and understand those curriculums with enough fidelity to get the results that we wanted. So I think that leading a highly effective implementation and sticking to the plan long enough to work to have a meaningful impact is really important when we're thinking about curriculums and the types of curriculums that we're choosing.
That's a great point,
Schools
Sonia.
and districts. Yeah, go ahead.
No, so that is a great point. And the good news is that science of reading does not come and go. It's been pretty standard for a long time about how we teach reading. The methodologies may have changed, but how students and people learn to have language and learn to read has not really changed a whole lot. So that was a great connection. So thank you for putting that information into our chat and questions. So Sonia, I will let you continue on. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So let's dig deeper, because I think that really one of those key things that we need to think about with all of this are those formative assessments. And I want to dig deeper into that and thinking about the formative assessments that we're using and how data-driven instruction can really optimize instructional time. I think some key considerations to keep in mind with regards to formative assessments is, do your formative assessments alert you to readiness for core instruction? So understanding how ready students are can really help teachers to effectively plan instruction. It gives them an understanding of the supports and scaffolds that need to be in place based on that level of instructional support that the students in the classroom may need. So we know that teachers need to teach grade level core instruction to all students. But if they're getting information from a formative assessment that alerts them as to how many of those students are or are not ready for that core instruction, then they can be sure that they're planning for that differentiated instruction with their small groups during the week. So I think it's not only important to understand who's not ready so that we can plan for those small groups. But I think it's also really important to understand and receive data about who is ready, because for those students, I need to think then about providing extensions and enrichment to continue to grow them throughout the year so they don't flatline in their growth. I think another consideration is to think about, if the purpose of data is to inform your instruction, then we really need to make sure that our assessments are measuring the appropriate skills. So if you can switch on for me to that next slide, Stephen, thank you. So keep in mind then, do your formative assessments assess those big 5 areas that are most predictive of reading success for the particular grade levels in your campuses and across your district. So if we think about students at the grade level, getting a formative assessment that is assessing those key big 5 areas for that grade level, then what we can do is we can think about aligning those subtest areas with that science of reading. And when we do that, we can get a really clear picture of what priority content needs to be addressed to help accelerate growth with our whole class core instruction. So here's an example of an iStation report, and this is called an ISIP summary report. So this is a report for a 2nd grade class. And I really wanted to show you this to show you how it can be used to help prioritize that instruction for the teacher. So we can see on this report that we can see the overall percentages of students that are ready for core instruction in reading. But then we have that data divided out in those critical subtest areas for that grade. So as a teacher, if I'm coming in to analyze this data, I might instinctively say to myself, well, okay, I can see that there are like 50% and 13% of my students that are really not ready for core and text fluency. But if you think back to that simple view of reading equation, we know that that spelling and that vocabulary area is critical to build up to get skilled readers who can comprehend text fluently. So when we're getting data for our whole class, it helps us to determine how we're going to adjust our schedules to provide the correct supports for students who are not ready and for students who are ready. And it allows us to identify those areas that we might need to incorporate a little bit more of into our daily routines in the classroom to help drive that reading growth. I think another thing to think about is reflection, because we know teachers are really good at reflecting on their teaching and their data. It's a key component of teaching. So when we have data that allows us to see the overall reading growth trend of our whole class, we can then determine if what we are doing is working. And if that's available to us in a formative assessment monthly, it allows us to make those changes in a timely manner so that we can fix what needs to be fixed to get the growth that we want to see. So knowing that we have classrooms of students at those varying degrees of readiness, we have these reports that show us the growth of these different level cohorts across the school year. So students who are ready and students who are not quite ready, right? It takes that reflection to a deeper level. And then even consider too, do you have some reports that are showing you that not just for the overall reading ability, but what about those different subtest areas, right? Am I effectively growing and supporting students at all levels with spelling and phonemic awareness and alphabet decoding and vocabulary? So we can reflect and determine if we have the right systems, supports, and routines in place for those cohort groups and adjust accordingly in a timely manner. Another consideration is, do your formative assessments provide you with personalized data profiles for individual students? So do you have information that shows overall reading growth as well as individual skill or subtest growth? Because this can really help you to determine the areas of strength and need for those individual students, again, keeping that simple view of reading in mind so that you can plan that one-on-one or small group work. I think it's also a really great resource for parent-teacher conferences and student-teacher conferences in the classroom to help give ownership to those students, to help put them in control of understanding their learning. So that was a little bit of an overview of some important things to think about when we are using formative assessments and collecting data in our classrooms at the teacher level, but I think it's also important to consider What's available for you at the campus and district level? Do you have data available to help inform you of how your campuses and grade levels are measuring up to allow you to better understand where supports are needed? So can you see at your campus a quick report that's showing you all the different grade levels so you can determine what grade level might be having the most struggle and in what area are they having that struggle? I mean, you can even compare grade levels across your campus to determine if areas of need are showing up in the same skill area. And then that brings you to the deep reflection of, well, what kinds of curriculums are they using in those areas? Are they working or not? So a lot of really great um, things can come out of having the right data at that campus and district level to help you know what supports are needed across the different grade levels. This is just another example of a campus or district level report that's available at iStation that again is helping to show at the different grade levels those growth trends of all of those different level cohorts so that you might know where some supports might need to be in place to help those different levels. So are we seeing that we're not getting much growth with our students who are not ready for core? And if that's the case, what kind of supports can we put into action? Extra staff, that ancillary staff that can come in to help support teachers with small groups to provide more interventions and differentiation of core with those levels.
Sonia, with this slide specifically with this report, what I find is interesting is it answers that never ending question: are we closing that achievement gap between the different levels of students? So, you're looking to have a really high slope or really high incline from month to month to see, are we making a difference, and is what we're doing working? So this kind of answers that question. And this particular report brings in not just core instruction, but intervention and any type of literacy instruction that's being done. Is any of that working? Is it doing what we need to do to help close those gaps? Then you can certainly dig deeper. If not, then why not, right? And then you start having those great conversations around data about what we can do that might be a little different, what we can try. Do we need to increase the intensity, the frequency, or do we need more staff development in a certain skill? So this, data can be used to start that questioning and problem solving process.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. Now, we think about our teachers, and we know that teachers are brilliantly masterful at bringing structured literacy to life in their teaching and in their classrooms. Another consideration to think about is, how do you keep that structure of the science of reading alive when students transition into supplemental programs that are used at your campuses or across your districts, where students are now working independently? So is there consistency with the science of reading in transitioning from formative and summative assessments and whole group and small group instruction to independent work? So if you are currently using some type of program, is it providing explicit and systematic instruction for students based on where they are to help build up the necessary skill areas? Is it purposeful, or is it just a practice thing or something to keep them busy in the classroom? I think too, with those programs, another thing to keep in mind is, does it provide additional information at the student level to help further identify areas of need and struggle? Are there resources available to help deliver lessons and help save teachers time from having to create their own lessons? Finally, one final consideration is, what type of research is out there to back the assessment that you are using or that you choose to use? iStation is supported by decades of research, both internal and independent, I know Sabrina has some really great examples that she'll probably be putting in the chat for you, like the NWEA MAP predictability study, the iStation Studies dyslexia report. There's an independent study on iStation usage and how that leads to gains on that Park State assessment.
Right, yes, I did just actually put a lot of our research that's in there. And so our assessments and instruction are based on data from scientific and independent research studies. They've proven the effectiveness by evaluating and elevating reading in the classroom to help with those struggling readers, but also to help all readers to stay engaged. So I also put in there just our research page in general. If you wanted to go look at other research other than ones I linked there, there's one for the iStation research page. We partner with states nationwide to help do some collaborative research and predictability studies for high stakes testing. You know, Texas has done some, several other states have done some with us as well. So I encourage you to go read the studies that are listed there, and then go check out our own, individually check out our research page to see what other what other research might interest you.
Thank you, Sabrina.
Yes, sure.
So in conclusion, right, these key considerations. Do your curriculums support the science of reading, and are they systematic and cumulative? And would teachers benefit from professional development around the science of reading and structured literacy? And think about, have you established that data-driven culture, and do you have a formative assessment in place to obtain the necessary data to drive instruction and provide that those just-in-time supports to students to accelerate their learning? We do have, if you would like to take a quick scan of the QR code, some more information about iStation, or you can contact us at info.istation.com/contact us. We'd love to hear from you.
Absolutely, and I actually put the link in there to contact us, so you can either scan the QR code like she said, or click on the link in there and you can get more information from us, and we'll be happy to help you answer any questions or give you more information regarding iStation. And if you would like to, you can also follow us on our social media. We're available on many social media platforms: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We have our YouTube channel, and I'm actually going to put in there, we have an iStation blog that you can actually get to and just read some of the interesting articles that some of our teammates have written, or some of our customers have given us feedback and supported our blog efforts to help get the message out. So please do take some time to follow us on our platform. Follow us on our social media, and then take a look at our research page, take a look at our iStation blog to see what else we can offer for you.
All right, perfect. So now we've come to the Q&A portion of our webinar here today, where you can now send in your questions in. So Sabrina and Sonia can answer your questions live on the air. If you haven't already, you can send in your questions, and you can do that just by accessing the Q&A panel that we have right there. It's on the bottom right-hand side of your screen. It's the option next to the chat button. If you can't see it, there should be 3 dots or an ellipses next to the chat button. Click on that, and that should bring you to the Q&A panel. All right, well, now let's begin.
Yes, please go ahead and enter your questions. I see a few folks typing some in, so this is your opportunity to ask Sonia and I any questions that you'd like to know about iStation, or any questions you would like clarified about the science of reading or Scarborough's rope or anything. Right. Sonia, one actually just came through, the question, which I think is really timely right now. It's about summer school and the science of reading. So can the science of reading be implemented during summer school? Because that we're all, headed toward the end of the year. And the good news is science of reading can be implemented in summer school the same way it is implemented during your regular school year. It all begins with gathering really good assessment, interpreting that data to determine what are the areas of need, and applying that hierarchy of reading to those skill sets, and then providing the instruction, literacy instruction based on that science of reading with direct, explicit instruction. So yes, it can be implemented in the summer school atmosphere.
Absolutely.
Any other questions? Would this also work for K through 8th grade? Absolutely. And I think, Kim, I'm not really sure if you're talking about science of reading or iStation, but I will address both. The first one, science of reading works in, good, great, I'm answering the question. She said both. The good news is that it actually works in any literacy setting. So K through 8th, we actually, iStation does have reading and assessment instruction to help support students through K through 8. We also have Spanish products, and we also have math products. So we're able to support you in any of the areas for your grade levels asked. As far as the science of reading, it works in any literacy environment. The trick is, or the magic, or what Sonia referred to as brilliantly masterful educators, is we need to take a look at the data, and the data will tell us what we need to do for our students. And then we apply that information through the science of reading, which then impacts our instruction. Great. Let's see.
Yeah, Sabrina, I think that those assessments are really key, because if we think about building that house, you know, sometimes we get those students up there in 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, and there's cracks in the foundation. And when we have the right assessments in place, then we can go in and we can determine those decoding and language areas that we need to work on and fill in to make that foundation stronger for that comprehension to occur in those students.
Absolutely. And another question just came through, another timely one. It has to refer to high dosage tutoring. So we're also hearing a lot of questions around high dosage tutoring and with the new ESSER funding and information like that. So the question is, there has been a lot of discussion around high dosage tutoring. Can the science of reading be applied in the high dosage tutoring setting? And again, I'm going to say absolutely yes. The science of reading applies to any literacy instructional setting, including tutoring. Science of reading all starts with that core instruction, doing your assessment, evaluating that core instruction, resources and strategies, and then from there digging in deeper to determine who might need additional literacy instruction, and then what do they need. So that additional instruction can be done and provided in high dosage tutoring settings. It can be done in intervention. It can be done through dyslexia or students receiving special education services, because of how we acquire language doesn't change, right? Now, it may take some students a little longer to acquire those, and more repetition and more frequency and more intensity, but we still acquire it in the same way. I would recommend all educators providing literacy instruction to collaborate on the data and instruction to provide it. Meaning that if you have core instruction, an educator that's providing core instruction, and then you might have someone different providing tutoring, providing dyslexia services, that those two educators get together on the students that they have in common, so that they can really decide on instruction that will complement and build upon and reinforce all instruction together. So whatever that core instruction is doing in the classroom, we want to fully support that in a dyslexia environment, perhaps in an intervention environment, that all of those literacy skills being taught complement one another, reinforce, and build upon, prior knowledge as well. So the core instruction is the key. The data will help unlock any problems, and then we continue to move on through those doors by applying the science of reading. So that was a really great question, and a long answer, but a great question.
Thank you, Sabrina.
Sure.
And let me just jump in really quick. I see that there are a few questions that have been submitted, but I'd just like to say, for those of you who have not yet submitted, again, just do so by going to the lower right-hand side of your screen, clicking the More Panels option, and then clicking on Q&A panel, and then click Submit. If you can't find that for whatever reason, please feel free to enter your questions into the chat as well, and we will get to them. All right, thank you.
We'll wait a few more minutes for some other questions to come through. Steve, if you're seeing those, I'm not seeing them on my end. If you can either send them to me or read them aloud, we'll be happy to address those, but I don't see those coming through and it's probably operator error on my side.
I don't see them either.
Right. Yeah. So, so this question came in a little while ago. Just asking if you could just go a little more in detail about how the reporting works.
How the reporting in iStation works. Sonia,
Yes.
do you want to take that one?
Sure. So the reporting in iStation works in such the way that at the beginning of every month, the ISIP assessment for students will be automatically available. So the students would have an account, they would easily log on and take that ISIP formative assessment, and that data would be available in real time for teachers to then go in and start analyzing. Teachers will get data reports for their whole class to help them drive whole class instruction. And then they will also get reports at the individual student level. And then as they continue to take that monthly formative assessment every month, right, they will start to get those beautiful trend lines that you saw in some of those graphs to help identify where we might need more areas of support in the classroom. Students, our assessments are nationally normed. So students, when they take that first ISIP assessment, will get placed into an instructional level or tier. And that helps the teachers to determine how ready the students are for that core instruction, because it's comparing the students to students around the nation who took the assessment at the same point in time, dependent on grade level, right? So that allows teachers to track the growth of those individual students by comparing it to those national norms and being placed in those levels of instructional support across the school year to help us to determine if we are getting enough growth or not. So if what we're doing is working or not. And it does identify for the students, it identifies their overall reading growth as well as those individual subtest areas that they're getting assessed in dependent on their grade level. So we can monitor the growth in those individual skill areas as well as their overall reading growth. And then those reports are also available to campus leaders and managers and district leaders at the campus and district level as well. What am I
Right. I think
missing,
it's
Sabrina?
also, yeah, I think it's also important to know that those assessments they start at grade level for students and they're computer adaptive. So it helps that the teachers start narrowing down what might be causing some of the problems. Maybe it's showing up as comprehension or showing up low in fluency. And then you start figuring out what's causing that problem. Often those are the symptom of underlying issues, right? The underlying issues will follow along with the science of reading, the hierarchy of reading. And you can start going down. They're not fluent because is it phonics? Is it phonemic awareness? Is it letter knowledge? So it will computer adapt based on the student's responses. And then from that, we're going to place them into that cycle of instruction that Sonia was referring to, that we're looking at that zone of proximal development for students and placing them appropriately into the instruction. Another question comes in. Does this help determine if the core reading is working? If we feel we are quick to put students into tier 2 and it's truly core instruction? That is a great question, Kim. And I think that's what we all have to do. We have to, when we get assessment and we take a look at it, the first go-to is my core working? Then with iStation's assessments, we are not assessing how they're doing on our product. What we are assessing are how are they progressing and performing as readers, which is inclusive of all reading instruction. So yeah, it can help answer the question, have the data, is it working? And then you have to start looking further, why not, right? Is it the resource itself, or is it the implementation? Do the teachers not have enough professional development how to use tools? So it can help address those questions. Sure, great question.
All right. So it looks like those are all the questions that we have, unless something came, excuse me, on your end.
No, I don't see anything else coming through.
I'm not seeing anything
Okay.
either.
All right, so I'll just say that if any questions do come to your mind, everyone, while I go through my closing slides, please feel free to put them into the chat or into the Q&A, and our team over at DEA, we will send them over to iStation so that they can respond to you after the event. So again, please feel free to continue submitting your questions while I go through the final slides. But first off, thank you again to Sabrina and Sonia for your time here today. And of course, thank you to iStation. And to our audience, of course, I would also like to thank you for joining us as well. For those of you who enjoyed what you saw here today, as I'm sure you did, there are many more upcoming web seminars like this one that are provided by us here at District Administration, which is the leader in editorial coverage of news, trends, as well as current issues in K through 12. We have a wide range of readers here who subscribe for free to DA, and they stay up to date with us online and through our print magazine, newsletters, and web seminars like this one. Also, if you would like to watch this web seminar again, or for those of you who believe that what you saw here today from iStation was very knowledgeable and you would like to share it with your colleagues, you'll be pleased to know that our team at DA, we will be sending you an email at some point tomorrow with an on-demand recording of this web seminar, as well as a link to the slides. So look out for that. So with that, on behalf of District Administration, this is Stephen Blackburn. Thanks, everyone. Take care, be well, and stay safe. And again, thank you all.